This tutorial will cover the basics of the Vortex sequencer display. Firstly, the keyboard display at the top shows all incoming MIDI notes from your keyboard. You will notice the 4 distinctly colored sections. The red section is reserved for the real-time triggers which manipulate the playing sequences. The blue and green sections are the main sequencer octaves. It is generally assumed that the green octave is the main section for working on sequences and the blue octave will play the sequences an octave lower. However, on the advanced page you can transpose either of these octaves to any desired pitch. The yellow octave is for the pitch triggers which allows transposing playing sequences on the fly, as well as rescaling the output to any desired chords or scales. The position of this octave can be moved to either C5 or C6, or disabled altogether. The step sequencer screen shows all settings related to the currently selected sequence, which is selected by either pressing a MIDI key, or manually selecting it from the top menu. The note display shows a 2-octave range of notes. The middle line represents the root pitch of the sequence and so notes can be up to an octave higher or lower. Quick reference information can be accessed at any time by clicking on the green question marks and holding the mouse. You can add a note by clicking on an empty step. To remove a note, double-click it. To add multiple notes, click on a note and drag the mouse left or right. If you want to only paint notes on currently active steps, hold the Shift key. To remove multiple notes, click a note whilst holding Ctrl and dragging. To move a note up or down, either use your mouse wheel or click and drag, up or down. To move all notes which are on the same line, hold Ctrl and use your mouse wheel. Doing this whilst holding Shift will also gather other notes along the way. To move the sequence left, right, up or down, you can use the Shift button and drag the mouse in the desired direction. To reverse the whole sequence, click on the flip button. To edit the velocity of a step, click on an active step and drag up or down. The velocity can also be edited on the dedicated velocity display. Using this display, the mouse wheel can be used to edit the sliders. Holding Ctrl will give a coarser resolution. The slider can also be dragged up and down, or the Shift button can be used to drag all sliders up or down. Each sequence also has 2 dedicated CC sequencers, and these displays work in exactly the same way as the velocity screen. The CC sequencers can be assigned to any CC number selected from their respective menus. The button rows at the bottom of the sequence display are used for extra functions. These can be enabled for each step. To activate, simply click on the desired button and it will enable. Clicking it again will disable it. As with the notes, you can also drag across the button rows to enable many at once. To disable many, you can also drag whilst holding the Control key. Holding Shift whilst dragging will only add to currently active steps. I will now describe what the rows actually do. The octave row is for manipulating the pitch in various ways. You can select the mode via the Octave Mode menu. For example, choosing +1 will simply make selected steps 1 octave higher. The cycle modes are more interesting. They cycle between 2 values, incrementing or decrementing each time they are called. This can add some nice movement and complexity to a sequence. The volume row overrides the velocity of the step with the amount that the volume knob is set to. It can be used as an accent, or alternatively used for quieter notes. This knob can also be automated via your host, so you could create some interesting movement within a sequence. The ties row is for joining notes together in various ways. You can select the mode from the ties mode menu. The extend modes allow making notes X steps long via consecutive enabled steps. So enabling 2 buttons will make a note 2 steps long as it doesn't hit another note. The stutter row is a bit different as it doesn't relate to the playing steps. It is used by the programmable stutter trigger, so when the trigger is engaged, this row determines the rhythm. The steps row is a single slider which can be dragged to select the desired sequencer size. Sequences can be between 1 and 32 steps long. The copy button allows copying an entire sequence, which can then be pasted to another sequence elsewhere using the paste button. It will copy all settings including the options. Alternatively, you can use the Set All button, which will duplicate the current sequence to all 12 sequences. The Double button will duplicate the first 16 steps to the last 16 steps. The Quadruple button will copy the first 8 steps to the rest of the sequence. The Template button will select which template is being used by Vortex. You can make your own by duplicating the default template and editing the PNG files. This setting is stored in the Windows registry. The 3 buttons on the right side of the sequencer display are default and random buttons. The green button sets the target to its default state. The blue button will randomize the target, and the red button will randomize all 12 sequences simultaneously. Each set of buttons will affect a different target. Notes will affect note pitches. Muse will affect which steps are active, and sliders will affect the velocity or CC sequencers depending on which is currently visible. Each button row also has its own set, and the top right set will randomize everything in the current sequencer. Vortex has an octave dedicated to 12 real-time performance triggers such as a retrigger, stutter and half tempo. This row of buttons at the bottom is used to determine which of these triggers the selected sequence will respond to. So for example, you could have a sequence that only responds to half tempo and all other triggers will be ignored. This is a powerful creative tool because each sequencer can respond to different combinations of triggers. On the bottom row, repitch decides whether the sequence will respond to the pitch triggered octave. Usually for drum sequences you would want this disabled. The M-Tune buttons are used by the multi-sequencer to decide whether the sequence responds to either of the M-Tune transposers. If both are selected, M-Tune 2 will be used. The Scale Shift button determines whether the scale shift value will be used when using the pitch triggers. Solo will isolate the current sequence, which makes it easy to temporarily hear only the current sequence. Squash to scale is a convenient way of making notes fit a particular scale or chord. When enabled, just select a preset from the menu or make your own by clicking Notes on the keyboard display. It means that you can randomize notes on the display knowing that they will fit your desired scale. The No Pitch button is a shortcut to quickly switch off all pitch-related settings, useful for drum sequences where pitch changes are not desirable. I will now briefly discuss the menus. It is worth mentioning here that clicking on the left half of the menu will bring up the pop-up menu, whereas clicking on the right half and dragging up and down will allow scrolling through the menu items. The Tempo menu selects the current clock division of the internal clock. Each sequencer can run at a different tempo. The Direction menu determines the playback characteristics of the sequence. For example, the sequence could play in reverse or random order. Transpose will transpose the current sequence by the set value. Channel will select which MIDI channel the sequence will use. By default, the sequences use channels 1 to 12, which makes things logical. However, this setting gives you the option to use any MIDI channel you want. Different sequencers could even use the same channel. Velocity selects what determines the sequencer's velocity. Sequenced is the default mode, which uses the slider bars on the sequence. Fixed velocity uses the fixed velocity knob at the bottom right to determine the percentage of the global velocity knob in the master section.